Welcome to the SSI Orbit podcast, a forum for conversations that explore the ever-growing ecosystems of self-sovereign identity. And I'm your host, Mathieu. So I was reading through a bunch of your customer futures posts, which you send as a newsletter. There's a blog. We'll link this in the show notes. I think it's for anyone interested in these podcast conversations, SSI Orbit. I think you'll get a lot of value out of Jamie's posts. But it got me thinking a little bit, and I'm hoping the conversation today could really bring light to the fact that organizations should be taking self-sovereign identity, however we want to call it, these principles, this new way of doing things, the new way of managing identifiers, how organizations should be taking this very seriously because it will impact how they're interacting with their customers or prospective customers in a near future, and getting ahead of the curve could help build competitive advantages today. And customer engagement as a topic is very interesting to me. I have a background working in call centers. That's kind of when I started my career, working in call centers onshore, working with third-party vendor call centers offshore. That was kind of one very popular way of organizations engaging with their customers in the past. It seems to have died down a bit. It seems to have, over the past decade, been under the pressure of cost-cutting initiatives, and with the digitization of everything and digital transformation happening, companies have been trying to cut costs and pushing customers to other mediums to interact with them. And so it would be interesting maybe to start this conversation just looking at what are the different channels that organizations use today to interact with their customers, maybe some of the pros and cons of these. I think you also talked about some of the pros and cons of call centers and how they relate to other channels as well. But it would be a good starting point maybe for us to just start understanding how organizations interact with their customers today. And I think it'll lead to an interesting conversation.
Well, that's a great starting point, and thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I think starting by thinking about customer engagement is exactly right, and customer outcomes. And before I jump into how organizations are doing it today and some of their challenges and why, digital wallets and this idea of customer empowerment technology is going to change things, is because businesses are really clumsy today in the way they engage customers. And that there's a couple of reasons for that. Part of it is the technology available to them, because they can only really push messages out. And I'll talk about the channels in a second. But secondly, they're kind of incentivized often to reduce costs at all, at the expense of maybe great customer experience. But also, when they're pushing those messages out, or those, directing individuals to specific channels, so are all the other businesses. And so we kind of get overwhelmed by these messages that arrive in our inboxes, on our phones, or by the notifications we get in our apps. And that's really why it's clumsy, because we're starting from the organization side and what they need, rather than thinking about the customer and their outcomes. And I kind of say that businesses are designed inside out in that way, and that we really need to start thinking outside in. But to your point about the channels they use, there are variations, but really I think it kind of comes down to four. I think of them as four different channels. So there's the messaging channel, where the brand or the organization, usually in a kind of sales motion, or maybe it's service, they ping a message to the individual using a channel that the customer already has, like an SMS. Maybe it's a WhatsApp. Maybe it's pinging them on the social media handle that the CRM is listed, but it's push. It's interruptive. I'm hoping the customer gets it, assuming I got their data right, their contact right. The second one is email, and it's also push. And individuals are now bombarded by sales and service messages in their inbox, and that's why they're putting up all these junk spam filters and trying to manage the inbound chaos. And so both of those are push, and by organization, that's why it feels so noisy on the individual side. But there are two more, and they're pull. So the third one is, well, I'll get the customer to come to my website, and then I'll get them to land on the website and log in, and hopefully they'll remember their password. And there's this idea that password reset is the new login. You haven't checked with the insurance company or your pension provider or the healthcare company for at least 9 months. You can't remember. You wrote it down probably. And so we do this dance, we arrive, we can't remember. And often on that website, especially for regulated companies like healthcare and banking, they don't trust the message to go through email. So what they do is they message you and say, hey, we have a message for you, a really important one, but we can't tell you here. You got to come and log into our website and check your inbox. So I've got another inbox and it's really fragmented and, as I say, clumsy. And then the fourth, actually, just to quickly on that third one, I arrive on the website and guess what? There's forms to fill out. There are pages to scroll, FAQs to navigate, really inelegant user experiences. Maybe, if I've got my privacy hat on, maybe they're scraping and scanning all my clicks and taps. And, there's a really weird cookie dance we do when we're on these websites. And so, the websites are only so effective at customer engagement. And then the fourth one is apps. I can the pool, I can get you to come to my app. And if you think about all four of those, they're done from the business's perspective. And especially it's really acute with apps. If I've got, I don't know, 100 business relationships, organizational relationships, from my employer to the companies that help me manage the home, I might have several different bank accounts, several different credit cards, my healthcare providers, they've all got apps. They're all trying to digitally transform themselves. And so I've got this explosion of apps, and what looked like kind of fun app store downloads is now this, I've got like 5, 6, 7 screens to scroll through to find the right thing. And I'm trying to put them in folders and it's just a mess. So I think 2 of them are push, the way we push messages to individuals, to email and SMS and WhatsApp. And 2 of them are pull, so to websites and apps. And I think from a digital customer experience point of view, it's not working. They're spending loads of money on terrible conversion, on broken customer experiences. And, I think it's time for customers to have their own tools to reimagine reimagine the customer experience, but also just make it easier for customers and help them get things done. And that's where I think, the ideas around self-sovereign identity, data stores, wallets, all that good stuff, I think has a real opportunity to create a kind of 10x improvement in the way we engage with organizations.
And it's funny with the 2 first ones, the messaging, whether it's through social media or messaging apps or email, the push mechanisms. It's funny, as you mentioned, there's like these further solutions which are like secure messaging, or they end up pushing you to go into their account. And I could think about my bank or even the revenue agency in Canada. Like, I have inboxes there that I never check, and then stuff happens and they say, well, we sent you a message, but it's like, why would I have read it there first of all? And then even if like email, like you're right, like I go into my Gmail, there's so many filters of like social things or promotions or whatever that you never see these things. And then any interaction that an organization is trying to have with you just kind of gets pulled into all the junk, all the other things. It's doesn't feel like a direct personal interaction with them anymore. And then it makes me wonder, like, even if we're like, most of our interactions are digital today, there probably still is value of having human interactions, even though it's over digital mediums, right? And I take back to my call center example, like when you called the call center, you were talking to an agent that was representing the company, and there was some relationship that you're able to build over the interaction with that person, versus an email coming in my inbox and I know it hasn't been sent by a person and it just gets kind of bucketed into everything. So do you think there still is value even through digital mediums of communicating between an organization and an individual, of having kind of a human touch to it?
I think if you scratch the surface of the point you're making about what is a good experience, and is a good experience about the relationship and the trust you build, or is it really just about getting it done as fast as possible and getting out of there? And there's this idea of designing for friction. And it sounds silly, but if you kind of think about the interactions you have, there's kind of good friction and bad friction. And what you're talking about with the human experience, and there's a humanity to it, and a expectation, and maybe a patience with, you know, good friction. Because maybe I'm going through a really hard time, I'm having to move home, and actually, there might be someone who I you know, that helps me through that journey. That might be thinking about where it's appropriate to have a human help and where it's not. I think good friction needs to be separated out from bad friction. And good friction are those times where you're creating a valuable experience. And maybe it's a human experience, and that's appropriate for the context or appropriate for the customer moment. But bad friction is where we're having to fill out forms, having to give data to the organization where they already have it, or where they don't need to collect it. Or if you think about design patterns and onboarding, there are those checkboxes that are about saying, you know, you can't tell if it's a double negative or a triple negative or what you're really clicking. And they're trying to trick you into doing the thing that serves them and not you. And so what your point about, you know, a human touch, I think we need to separate out the good friction from the bad friction. And sometimes we might want to introduce steps because it's good friction. It's building trust. It's saying, slow down, do you know what you're doing? And I use the example of, should you be able to open up a life insurance policy with 2 taps? Probably not. You know, there needs to be guidance and advice and understanding what's going on. And we could we automate it at the point of 2 taps? Yes, absolutely. But there might be steps we want to put in place, and that could be a human touch, but it might just be more information. And so we should think about good friction versus bad friction. And one of the outcomes might be having a human touch. But there's one of my favorite ways of thinking about this is sometimes the best experience is no experience. And I don't mean that we shouldn't have touch points. I'm saying we should get rid of the bad stuff, get rid of the bad friction that's just clumsy or inappropriate or duplicative or manual. That's the stuff we should get rid of. I still want experiences that are emotional and engaging and valuable where that's appropriate. And I think businesses mix the two up.
And it seems like all these mechanisms of interacting with one another have kind of got filled with bureaucracy, right? Whether it's my email I talked about is just filled with marketing and just crap. my SMS inbox is just filled with MFA notifications today. It's like half of it is that. My browser is filled with forms. Even it's moving now to like, if I go through apps or I go through podcasts, like most of it has become just corporate. So it's interesting over time how like bureaucracy just kind of moves in there. And so I wonder, like, as consumers, like we're always looking for pure or more pure spaces that aren't kind of impacted by what we feel are kind of not trusted organizations just trying to, I don't know, make more money off of us type of thing. So it's interesting how bureaucracy seems to find its way into all these different things.
Well, bureaucracy, but also incentives. You know, there's loads of examples where the left hand of the organization isn't speaking to the right hand. You know, the sales and marketing team are trying to hit their numbers and the operations team are trying to hit their numbers, and they don't always join up. You know, I can get this beautiful onboarding, seamless, 0 tap experience, but then once I've bought the product, it's really, you know, I'm through the buy cycle, but they forget about the own cycle. You know, I'm on the other side of the you know, the delivery's messed up and it doesn't work when I set up, and then there's no way of contacting them when it does, and I need some, you know, spare part or to return something, and they don't think about that whole journey. I think bureaucracy is part of it, but also so are incentives. If you can incentivize an organization across the whole customer journey, I think you start to join up different parts of the business, but then they can be incentivized to make sure that it's a smooth journey across the end-to-end experience. But you're absolutely right. Bureaucracy's really impeded the way companies think about building great customer experiences. And, you know, as I said, it's manifested in too much push, spam, and we're fighting it off. You know, there's a hidden thing though. You know, the point you just made is kind of from the perspective of one organization and whether they're good at building customer experiences. But as I said earlier, I've got, I think on average 150 relationships with organizations. As a household, I have on average 40. And if each of them digitally transform themselves, then I've got like 40, 50, 60 apps. And they are not connected and seamless. But maybe when there's my customer journey, so not the one the business sees, but my customer journey, why can't I stitch them together in a seamless way? So travel's a good example where I've got an app to get me to the airport. I've got an app for the airport. I've got an app for my COVID certificate, an app for the plane, an app for the taxi on the other end, app for the hotel with my key card, an app for the event I'm going to. They're not joined up. And I've got to create 7 different accounts, 7 different passwords, 7 different forms to fill in. And I think the promise is to build technology on the customer side that allows you to connect those things together. And guess what? That's going to be good for business. So what looks like a bureaucracy problem, because they're making things worse, organization, within the organization to the customer. If you start on the customer side, I think you really open up new opportunities for, frankly, innovation, but also just much more imaginative customer experiences when I can think about customer outcomes that are across several organizations. And that's only possible when you start with the customer and give them digital tools.
I agree with the incentive problem, and I was just searching this to make sure I got it right, but one of the best quotes from Charlie Munger is, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome." I think it's true for just many different things in life. You then wonder though, like, so if the digital transformation needs to happen from the side of the consumer, or at least the organizations working together, or organizations themselves funding the digital transformations need to look at it from the side of their customer or from the consumer. Do you still have, we still have like an intermediary problem today, right? Like even when you talk about, I was talking about bureaucracy on the internet, or bureaucracy on email, or on my text messages. It's all the same companies that are kind of doing this, like whether it's Google or Apple, whether I'm accessing these through a browser or accessing it through a mobile device. And you gave the example of password reset earlier as well, which is like, it just kind of delegates the identity downwards to these companies, right? If I can never remember my username and password and I'm resetting it, which personally I must be resetting usernames and passwords every week, it basically, that trust or identity gets delegated down to the Googles, down to the Apples, down to the Microsofts, down to the companies that are kind of these intermediaries and are providing these the distribution, I guess, for the organizations, whether it's emails, whether it's browsers. Do they have to be involved in this transformation as well? Because in the identity space, like, we're seeing activities from Apple and Google, and like recent news with mobile driver's licenses, and they're going to be supporting them. But the second that these things are supported in browsers and in these different places where the distribution happens, where the touch points happen, does it make it easier? Does it make it harder for organizations? Like, I guess I'm just, there's this third party that's kind of involved in the interactions, and how do they need to kind of move along with the transformation? And then what are the incentives for them to do so as well?
Great question. I think, yes, there are going to be a new breed, a new category of intermediaries. And if you think about who are the organizations that help businesses, we think of first and second parties. I'm the first party, the organization's the second party, and we interact. And there are these ideas of third parties, and those third parties exist to help the businesses, right? So maybe they are legal teams, maybe they are CRM providers, maybe they are analytics companies, maybe they are new AI platforms that help them do predictive analytics for customer churn. Those are third parties that exist on the side of the business. Who do I get? Right? I get humans to help me. I get doctors and lawyers and accountants, and they're agents working on my side in the human world. So I think it's inevitable we're going to see new digital agents appear on the individual side just to help me get stuff done. And that's not combative. It's not trying to cause problems for organizations. It's trying to just help me in my life get things done. And those intermediaries are going to show up. And you made a really important point at the end of your question, which is, what are the incentives? Why will businesses care, and how do they participate? If we get these new agents that sit on my side, and I'm going to put AI and personal AI to one side for a second. Just think about tools on my side that help me get things done, help me make decisions, help me manage the explosion of receipts and the exhaust of my digital life. If we get that right, then that's going to be even more valuable to organizations, because I will be able to share the right information with the right time, with the right department even. And that's going to help me with these new customer experiences that I want to enable on my side as a customer. But it's going to help the organization save cost. It's going to help them market better to the right people. If you think about outbound marketing, they don't really know who's seeing their messages. They don't really know where their outbound ads and kind of brand statements are landing. There's a brand safety question of like, in which channels are their messages being sent? And they don't know, and they can't verify, and there's a whole attribution problem. Because of that, the answer is gather more data, get more channels, send more messages. If I send 1,000 messages as an organization and I get 5%, 50 of them are even being looked at or kind of interacted with, and then 5% of those are actually going to go on to buy something, the hit rate's terrible. So what do? I increase the volume. I don't send 1,000, I send 10,000, I send 100,000. But if we're interacting with individuals who have agents, brands could interact in a whole new meaningful way and say, well, I'm not going to send the message to the wrong person at the wrong time because the customer said they're not interested in a car right now. Or maybe they've put their hand up to say, I am interested in a car. And now we've got much better signaling on the customer side. So that's kind of an incentive thing, but I'll give you a much more tangible example. Change of address, which is a kind of an obvious one, and people talk about it from an identity point of view all the time. When I move home, I have to let 40 companies know that I've moved home, and it's a real pain. And I have to log into their systems, remember my password, hang on the call center for 30 minutes before I then accidentally get cut off and have to join again. I then have to prove it's me, by the way, when I do that, and I have to stand on one leg and give them my blood type and inside leg measurement to prove it's me changing my address. That's horrible. Now, we only do it every 7, 10, 15 years, and so it's not enough of a problem for me to want to do it all the time. But if you gave me a tool that had a verifiable address in it, when that changed, my agent could say, hey, here are the 27 companies that you've shared verifiable address with in the last 3 years. Would you like me to let them know? And I go, yeah, but not this company, this company, and this company. This company, I used it for shipping, and they were terrible, and they were spammy, and I don't want them to have my address. That takes me a minute to scan which ones I want to see the update and then send it. Why will businesses do that? Well, right now, 1/3 of calls into call centers are to do with identity and password reset. So they just got rid of either 30% of their call center volume, or they just were able to serve 30% more people in the same amount of time. So from an ROI, business case, digital transformation perspective, this feels pretty valuable, I think. And I've just given you a teeny tiny example of a teeny tiny subset of where they might be interested to be able to interact with the customer. Another example would be, this is an obvious identity thing, but when I call the contact center, I do the dance of mother's maiden name and date of birth, all the things, by the way, fraudsters already have to prove it's me. So it's ridiculous in the first place. But then I've got to pass security. That's going to take somewhere between 30 and 60 seconds, maybe more. Right? So their call handling time is wildly dented because they can't prove it's me. If they could ping my agent, say, hey, we're on the phone to you right now, and my agent goes, yeah, I'm on the phone to the bank right now, just automatically replies yes, I pass security. Because no one else can have that wallet, that agent. Maybe I biometrically authenticate to my phone. Am I on the phone right now to the contact center? Yes. That took 6 seconds. So again, I'm using a very narrow contact center, high touch example, but I think the business case is there for organizations to want to care about these intermediaries out of self-interest, not because they're trying to empower the customer, because it saves them cost and time and money and efficiency.
I can confirm from my call center days that that was approximately the volume of calls that came in for password resets, which was frustrating. um, and I guess the point you made, which is very important, is starting to look at, you when you were talking about just advertising, is just starting to look at quality over quantity. And I think some of the technologies that we talk about could allow this to happen, where I would much rather target a much smaller group of people that are probably more likely to be interested in what I have to say and what I have to offer, or maybe already part of my community. It builds a better brand for my organization as well.
Completely. I want to make one more point about that. If you think about the economics just for a second, right? They buy in data to send out messages to people that they hope are going to respond with a very low hit rate, and then push them along a sales funnel and hope they get some conversion and maybe pay for some signals and buy signals in. There's the cost of all the compliance around that for starters, and the risk you carry that it's not compliant because you didn't get it in the first place in the right data set. But there's the cost to secure it, to ensure it, to manage it, to clean it, to dedupe it, and then the cost of just handling it all the way across the sales cycle to hopefully get a conversion from this small number of people. And so instead of sending a message to 1,000 people, what if you sent a message to 47 people and you got a 30%, 40% conversion rate? You might spend much more money on that. So actually your customer engagement costs might go up. It's going to feel a bit perverse, but your conversion rate, your average revenue per user on the other side is going to go up as well. So your sales effectiveness, your ROI on marketing is going to go up, even though you might be spending more to get those customers, but you're speaking to the right customers. And as you quite rightly put your finger on, it's going to drive brand trust. It's going to drive better customer experiences. And I find, especially in the identity community, we're often quite abstract and we use big terms or grand ideas. Take the example of buying a car, right? I go to Google, I type in test drive, whatever, for a car. I get sprayed with opportunities. Maybe some of them are helpful. Marketers do a big high five, say, great, we hit relevancy. Jamie's in the market for a car. Maybe I go and do a test drive and they do a high five again. Maybe I buy the car, maybe I don't. 3 weeks later, I'm still getting sprayed for ads for test drives. Maybe I decided I didn't want a car in the end. I wanted to join a car club. Maybe I did buy a car. None of those signals are back in the market at the right time in the right way for those ads. And it's just ineffective. Think about I use the word ROI, return on investment, and just the economics of this. Whereas if I'm in the market and I can express it, I'm one of the 47 people you messaged. When I buy a car, that signal goes away. You don't message me anymore. Maybe you sell me a sales package, a service package. Maybe you sell me car insurance. That suddenly becomes helpful. So I think the economics of brand engagement, customer engagement, take us right back to the first point I made about designing on the outside in. Now, rather than the inside out, which is hit my OKRs this month on how many conversions I got, and I'm trying to squeeze 0.5%. So none of what I'm saying is possible until customers have their own digital tools. Right now, all I have is SMS, email, websites, and apps. That's all I get. I think there's going to be so there are 4 channels. I think there's going to be a new 5th channel. And that's going to be the new customer endpoint that's trusted, authenticated. It's got identity in it. It's got my payment information. It's got my preferences, maybe my intent. If customers, and for organizations to engage with that, I mean literally connecting that to CRM systems. My agent will speak to SAP, Salesforce, Oracle, Azure, HubSpot, and I'll be able to automate things on my side. And I feel that the economics are going to be why organizations do that, because it's going to be much more effective at the exec level, maybe not at the detailed marketing budget level, because marketing costs might go up. But actually at an organizational level, I think conversion is going to be improved. ARPU is going to go up, average revenue per user. Sales effectiveness is going to go up. Customer sat is going to go up. That is, I think, the digital transformation opportunity. Because today, 50% of digital transformation cannot happen because it's only being done on one side.
There's something interesting then in looking, and maybe AI ties into this as well, which makes your agents smarter, but your intermediaries that are already facilitating your interactions via SMS, via email, via websites, via apps, there seems to be an opportunity for those to transform themselves into agents. If they already facilitate these interactions, that could be quite powerful as well. And I also really like the idea of shooting market signals, kind of consumers being able to provide inputs into the market, and it gets you into the whole VRM conversation as well there. It might be valuable to just take a step back and just talk about identifiers altogether as a starting point, because I think that's just a crucial piece to all of this happening, and organizations should be just thinking about that, of how they need to digitally transform around the way identifiers are managed. So it might be helpful to just take a step back and start with looking at kind of how IAM works today, how SIAM kind of came about, some of the similarities between SIAM and what we're seeing now with user-controlled identifiers, and where this needs to go to achieve what we're all talking about here, and then who needs to be driving this transformation around identifiers.
You know, there's a quagmire of history, politics, technology, religion, even philosophy about identifiers. The identirati we'll talk about, is it a capital I or a small I, and who gets to assign it to me? And I think some of it is really important. But do you know what's more important? Customer outcomes, digital trust. And I think there's a lot of people and organizations het up about which identifier is sent where and by whom. And I believe deeply in the principles of self-sovereign identity, the individual being able to not just self-assert everything about themselves, because that's a massive misconception. People think it's just about me making up my date of birth. It's not about that. It's about me creating my own digital endpoint that I alone control, and that over that, using that digital endpoint, I can share verifiable information with other organizations. I can prove a verifiable date of birth. And it really came from the DMV, or in the UK, the Driving License Authority. So I can really prove things are verifiable. It's definitely Jamie. It's definitely data's not been changed. That definitely has not been revoked. It was given to Jamie and only Jamie. I can do all that, clever cryptographic certainty and verification of data. But the point is, it's my endpoint. Why does that matter? Well, today, let's use your intermediary language. A lot of the customer engagement is run by third-party platforms, right? The bank wants to get in touch with me, or the car company wants to get in touch with me. I do so on someone else's platform. Maybe it's Facebook. Maybe it's on a third-party marketplace. Maybe it's on a website that the publisher controls. And the organization that runs that platform, or that publisher that owns the real estate where I'm getting that message, can control what I see. They control the identifiers. They could stop me seeing certain messages. They could redirect me to other organizations. And from a consumer point of view, I'm relying on that organization, that third party, that intermediary, to connect me to the brand and do so in a trusted way, and not surveil me, not to track me from place to place to place to place. And on the organization side, they, if I'm in charge of customer engagement, I really want to build lasting, valuable customer relationships where they spend more and more money and tell their friends about how great my service is. How do I reach customers? I have to go through these intermediaries. I can't reach customers directly because I've got their email address, and that goes to spam, and it's not an effective endpoint, and nobody's downloading my app, or 7% of people are. So I've got to use these other third parties to connect to customers, to authentically connect. And so it's that third party intermediary that's managing the identifiers. They set the rules. They decide if the identifier can be reused elsewhere. They decide what the cost of using that identifier is. They decide well, they could shut me out or shut the business out because I fell foul accidentally of their terms and conditions. So I think, without getting into the technical weeds of identifiers and decentralized identifiers specifically, I think it's about saying I've got a control point for me as the customer, and that I should be able to express that to the organization and be able to use that endpoint to be able to share verifiable data about me. So the organization can trust where the data came from. It's not just being self-asserted, but it's Jamie controlling the way I interact with the organization. And why does that matter? We often so often think about digital identity and digital identifiers being a digital thing, kind of an online thing, remote onboarding, all those types of interactions. If I've got an identifier that I control, I will use that in store. I'll use that, I can prove that it's me again. How often have you gone to a hotel and they've said, "Hello, sir, have you stayed with us before?" I'm like, "I was here 3 weeks ago." You have no idea it's me. If I can say, "Hey, this is a self-identifier, the same identifier that I used on the phone 2 weeks ago and that I stayed in on the 13th floor 3 weeks ago," that's my identifier that I can share and say, "Yeah, it's you again." That I think is really powerful. So yes, there's a privacy, and people will get very excited about non-correlation of identifiers. People get excited about Web3, blockchain identifiers, and how and where they're anchored. And those are important conversations about privacy, about societal control, democracy, and all that good stuff. I think if we start thinking about customer outcomes, a lot of it gets flushed out, because if I'm in control of the identifier, I can create new value, and that identifier can come with me. And then we get the nice, clever stuff around privacy, because I can make sure that I give every different organization a different identifier. And that's probably a separate rabbit hole podcast on its own, around decentralized identifiers. And there are many more experts than I to talk about that. But, I think when you think about customer outcomes, what businesses really want, I don't think organizations want to surveil people. I think they want to drive revenue, build great customer experiences at low cost. And having a customer in control of the identifier helps them do that.
Yeah, and so the identifiers today are under the control of these intermediaries, service providers, which results in these experiences. So having the identifiers owned by the end consumers also obviously allows end consumers to utilize, like your example, if you have data that comes to you from a hotel stay, whether you have data that comes to you from renting a car or whatever, being able to use these all together to then kind of build upon that relationship even deeper with organizations, which for organizations over time will just increase the value of each individual customer. So for an organization, is the only identifier you should be targeting to own is your organizational identifier? And that, I think, is a whole other pillar which kind of falls into place here of building better personal and unpersonalized interactions and relationships with customers. Is the organizational ID the only ID that an organization should be caring about owning?
That's a really great point. I mean, I think, again, there are PhDs written about organization ID. And there are many much longer and deeper technical conversations about organization ID, that's showing up in the EU with the EIDAS program. It's showing up in a lot of the countries who have corporate registers, Companies House. They're starting to really sweat. Do they really know who the company is? And what is a company? It's a set of articles and a CEO who declared, and a set of agreements that say that this will be a specified company with these terms, these people, and you got to do the identity of the people that create the company, who are the responsible officers and all that stuff. So I think these things are all tied together, and that's not to mention the fact that when I'm dealing with an organization online, I should really find out who it is. Can I really trust? If I'm dealing with Euro shoes, my agent should say, yeah, this is not a legitimate company you should be interacting with. That they were set up 3 days ago, whereas this company has this online reputation and so on. When you speak of organization identifiers, I think, again, it's going to be multiple. Departments are going to have identifiers. products are going to have identifiers. Divisions, call centers. So I think organization identity is in itself going to be multifaceted. It's going to be heavily related to employee identity. So I think there are projects that need to happen inside organizations when they think about, again, back to customer outcomes. What are the touch points with other entities that we need to care about? How do we reduce fraud? How do we deliver our business operating model in the most efficient way, thinking about new digital technologies where I've got an identifier for the customer. And yeah, when the organization's showing up to report taxes and reporting about employee numbers and that kind of thing to the government, then yeah, they're going to want, organization identifiers for their own supply chains and so on. So organization ID is a whole separate thread related. It might show up in the customer sales cycle, probably not for a while yet. I think customer ID and employee ID will happen much faster.
Because you could see it kind of where we're talking about these agents and giving the power to the consumer, but even in the current model of the push and pull methods, and we've listed these mechanisms, even if you have these so-called out-of-band communications, something like organizational ID could still be very useful to solve some of these fraud or just build the consumer trust.
Absolutely. I wrote a few posts about this at customerfeatures.com where, organization ID is the largest largest identity market you've never heard of. Because, think about all the interactions that a business does with other organizations, all the contracts, all the onboarding of suppliers, all the supply chain stuff. And employees are at the heart of that. I need a proof of employment, proof of identity. Is this individual authorized to act on behalf of the company? But think about all the contracts it signs. Think about all the payments it makes, payments it receives. So organization identity is going to be a very, very big deal. There's a lot to be worked through. There's a lot to be worked through about how and where organization identity shows up. There's a fantastic organization called Gleif, Gleif. For I'm sure many of listeners already know about Gleif, but that's an entity working really hard on using verifiable credentials for organization identity. So businesses already need an LEI, a legal entity identifier. And if we can use some of the clever wallet and credentials technology, we can make those verifiable instantly. Organizations can have their own VLEIs, their own identifiers and credentials that prove who they are and who the company is and who the responsible officers are and so on. So yeah, there's a huge market there. In time, that will come together beautifully with customer ID, citizen ID, because those two things need to marry. And it means that when the bank calls, I'll know exactly which company it is.
You've also written quite a bit on your blog about artificial intelligence. How it's probably going to be a pretty broad question, broad topic. I have done a podcast on the impact of generative AI on digital trust and how digital trust could help solve some problems there as well. But in this whole conversation that we're having today around customer outcomes and digital customers and creating more personal experiences and less personalized experiences, what excites you about what's happening in the AI space right now and how it's going to intersect and create more value for customers and organizations?
I don't think there's a part of the digital economy that AI is not going to touch. People think very short term about Gen AI for helping write blogs and help create content and help think about my sales strategy and help write software code. Those are very near term benefits. Much longer term, there's societal disruption around jobs, incredible upside around medical advances and automation and all those good things. I think there's a thread that is not as well seen or discussed around personal AI. And if I take, 5 years ago, if we'd spoken to someone in the SSI community, self-sovereign identity, or, people who might talk about wallet, agents and wallets on the individual side, there might be some machine learning in there. There might be, if this, then that rules. Hey, I'm going to get a flight. 24 hours before the flight. If the airline asks me for, passport, boarding pass, and so on, just say yes. So I don't get consent fatigue. I'm just say yes to everything. That's a kind of automation on my side. I think Gen AI is great for the kind of generative side of helping me say, well, I want to save for my pension. How might I achieve these goals? What are the things I should be thinking about? Or look at my bank balance and tell me the 10 ways I should be thinking about spending my money differently to reach these goals, whatever. And so there's a couple of things I want to dig into there. Firstly, those tools are going to sit on my side. There are big parts of the population who will not give all their health details to ChatGPT, not give all their pension plans, all their bank information, their emotional and relationship information to these large language model platforms that are public. Some will. Utility will win. Do you value privacy? Yes. Do you want a free cheeseburger? Also yes. Some people will give all this data to these large language models, and we'll probably do so privately soon. But I believe there's a huge new market about to emerge for personal AI, and that's different to personalized AI. Personalized is when it's someone else's model. Personal AI is when it's mine. It's trained on my data, can help me meet my goals. There's some boundaries, there's some control. Privacy, people will like that because I can see the edges of it. But I think most consumers will like it because it can be honed down on, trained on me, not just kind of a large model that's generalized for everyone else. So I think personal AI is a really important topic that we need to be thinking deeply about, and it has huge technical implications. How large is it to process? Will it be on device? Will it be elsewhere? If it's elsewhere, whose cloud is it running on? Whose provider is that? What's the security and privacy around that? And so on and so on. But I think there's, if you spend a little bit of time looking at it, and again, I've written a bit about it at customerfeatures.com, actually that AI is going to know us pretty well. And there's a really, really fascinating thread you can pull on, and that's about recommendations and trust. So let me give you a very provocative and challenging example. So Angelina Jolie did some medical tests with her doctors, and I think had it turned out she had an 87% chance of getting a certain strain of breast cancer. And she took the incredibly brave and difficult decision to have a double mastectomy based on that fact. She didn't have cancer yet. Just in her genealogy, she had a very high percent chance of getting it. So that's at one end of the spectrum. So if it says, look, here's some facts about your life that I can now predict based on the information you've given me, what might you decide to do in your life? Money you spend, relationships you create, jobs you take, based on recommendations from an AI. And what data was that AI trained on? And what incentives did that AI have to make certain recommendations? So once we have AI on my side, I think there's some really important questions we need to ask about. The way I frame this is about digital privacy is one part of this, but digital intimacy is going to be far more important. There's if anyone has the time or interest, you should go and read or watch as much as you can by Yuval Noah Harari and a guy called Mustafa Suleyman, he was a co-founder of DeepMind. But Yuval Noah Harari writes about, he's a historian. He talks about these AIs knowing us better than we know ourselves. And there's a really funny quirk here: the more I interact with it, the more it knows me. Even just the way I ask questions, how often and when, what mood I'm in. And so these AIs are going to have a real intimate relationship with us. What's going to start with directions. Google does it already for us. Get me from A to B. I just trust the blue line. But soon it's going to be, well, look, I spent 3 years with my AI and it gave me pretty good recommendations on what to buy, what music to listen to, how to spend my money. Suddenly, good news, Jamie, we've now added HealthBot. Give us your DNA, give us your blood samples, give us your medical history. We're going to keep you healthy. Okay. How might that inform me and help us make decisions in our life about how much I exercise, what I eat, and so on? So I'll pause there, but I think AI is going to be fantastically exciting for improvement, for productivity, for probably getting rid of the bad friction I talked about earlier. But coming up is, I think, a really challenging set of questions around what it knows about us and who's in control.
Yeah, it also reinforces the trend towards like edge computing and needing to have stuff kind of with you and not centrally managed. Like you could be using different services that are tracking your heart rate or your diet or your spending patterns, or even using external oracles that measure kind of, I don't know, in the interest rates in the market and different sales happening on things that you like. And then it just becomes, if you're able to give it the right kind of signals or inputs of what's important to you, you could easily imagine that this is at least a 10x benefit in your life. You gave the health example of Angelina Jolie, but this could become very widespread, and you can imagine the recommendations that your AI is giving you are just stuff you would never think about, or they would take you 100 years with. It's just not even fathomable that you could do that.
Absolutely. I'll give you a very spicy example. Who should I vote for? Right?
What country?
And I'm not kidding, right? So November next year in the US, over the next 2 years, there's some really interesting electoral events happening in Europe, across the US, and North America. How might not just AI, people talk about, oh, well, there's going to be fake ads and, fake images of presidential candidates saying or doing certain things, and can we trust it? That's really important content verification. I'm thinking about something much more insidious, right? I have a chatbot and I start talking to it about who I should vote for, and it learns what I like and what my views are. This is not just a simple survey. This is about bending my interests and awareness of facts and figures. By the way, did the policy that it says this particular candidate has, was that made up? Was that real? Just like that law court case where the lawyer showed up and with a legal precedent that hadn't existed, and he used the AI, which produced a whole backstory of the paper and the results and stuff. So who should I vote for? It's a really important example of how we think about personal AI guiding us, shaping us, and what do we trust. So digital trust is often about, does it technically work? Can I trust this message? Was it cryptographically signed? And that's what a lot of the SSI people talk about digital trust. Or maybe, who's the approved issuer? Is this, is this organization authorized to request this data? That's what an SSI person talks about when we talk about digital trust. What's the governance framework? Okay, let's open up the Pandora's box when we talk about personal AI and who gets to govern what a good or bad recommendation is. And I think this can be I think we're going to fall down the rabbit hole really, really quickly. So, I mean, I'm being a little bit pessimistic about how digital intimacy is going to really change the way we think about how customers make decisions. Should I buy this product or that product? Because that's just a variant of who should I vote for. But if you then get into this digital tool side of things of, well, that's going to start to guide me towards or away from certain companies. Who are the companies that have a fantastic water footprint or commitment to net zero? There's going to be a vast explosion of recommendation engines, I believe, on the customer side.
Yeah, which is maybe going to be the most transformative thing in any organization. I've been quite interested in, I think like a lot of people, like when ChatGPT came out, just quickly realizing like, oh, you're going to run these things on top of all of your organizational data, right? And it's going to improve you as a company and stuff like that. But one area I personally haven't thought about enough is this area of personal AI, which is exponentially larger and more impactful than just an organization using its own data to improve its processes or even improve its marketing or its offers and its products to customers. This is like for yourself as a digital customer, being able to plug in different data feeds that are kind of related, personal to you, personal to your identifier. And like you said, the whole recommendation is it's going to change. It's going to change the game
completely. And it sounds weird, but we've seen this movie before. Like part of what I write about and the conversation I have is this is relatively predictable. With the industrial, I mean, this is a bit abstract, but with the Industrial Revolution, we gave machines to businesses, right? They built factories and they got rid of the horses in the mines, and we got this incredible efficiency boost. But the real industrial revolution kicked off when we gave machines to people, right? We got boilers and cars and hoovers, and we got productivity on our side, and that unleashed a whole new economic wave and societal impacts and so on, and the birth of the suburbs. And the same things happened with data. We gave data machines for the last 30 years to business. They got CRM, they got predictive analytics, they could tell which customers are going to churn. They could look at defects in products. We gave data machines to business. All that's happening now is we're about to give data machines to people. And we're going to see that same explosion of productivity, societal impacts that we can't yet predict. And I think that is a massively simplified description of what's happening, but it tells you that we're empowering individuals not just because of privacy and security, those things matter, but because of the economic opportunity that sits on the customer side. There are new billion-dollar businesses about to emerge on the side of the customer that do things with and for customers, with and for people, rather than doing things to them, which is what our 4 channels that I mentioned before, email, apps, websites, and SMS. They do things to us. And I think intelligent, smart assistants, I don't just mean kind of Alexa. I mean smart assistants that have access to my personal data exhaust and where I am and what I think and what I need, and it helps me in my daily life. I think that's going to be the explosive, opportunity, but also the significant risks around digital intimacy.
So what's your big message to the SSI community?
I think it's zooming out. That last point I made about industrialization of data machinery on the business side, it's because the customer side is pre-industrial. Everything's manual, hard labor, repetitive. We sit on the land of the other, the other tech platforms, and I think much of this is predictable, and we're going to get tools of our own, partly for privacy and security, but partly because it's going to be economically effective. Great. The conversation today, it's like this new tech, this customer stack is emerging. And it's like there's a waterline. Below the waterline is how things work, and above the line is what you can do. And below the waterline, if you think about browsers, below the waterline is DNS and URIs and back buttons and responsive design in HTML5. But above the waterline in a browser is cat pictures and online banking and social media. And in the SSI world, largely, I think for the last 5 to 7 years, we've been below the waterline, having lots of frothy debates about universal resolvers and identifiers and about interoperability and standards and ZKPs and how we're cryptographically signing things. And they are critical and important conversations, but they're below the waterline, and we should recognize they're below the waterline. And what I'm trying to say is zoom out and let's think about outcomes above the waterline. What's this going to mean to be a digital customer in this future? Not how do we authenticate all the content, although that's important, but that's a below the waterline conversation. Above the waterline is what happens when we have personal AI that tells us how to vote. How do we think about new customer relationships? How do we think about building authentic ways to reconnect with businesses, and what does that mean for digital transformation? And what's the business case for businesses, and who are the intermediaries going to be in this new market? Who's going to be trusted as a brand to enter this space? Those are the questions I think I'd be asking, and I think it's a really exciting new conversation we need to have.
Thanks for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. To stay up to speed with future episodes, or to catch up on ones you may have missed, make sure to check out the SSI Orbit podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, or wish to see someone in particular on a future episode, you can find me by searching Mathieu Glaude on LinkedIn or Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me directly and I'll get back to you. See you all next time.